What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Collector's Outpost. I am John, and I am here with a special guest in the studio today. We actually reviewed this Obi-Wan Kenobi lightsaber in the last video, and I actually have the guy here who modeled and designed it. He is known as Anakin Starkiller from Stars End. What's up, man? How you going?
How's it going? Nice to see you.
Yeah. Glad that you were able to come on down here. Now, we have one hell of a lineup of lightsabers right now here.
Yeah, it looks like we've robbed Obi-Wan.
I mean, it's like, so we have episode 1s and we have 3 versions of episode 4 here, which is amazing. So I don't even know where to start. Dude, this stuff is awesome. Now, this is the newest model. Yep. Came out from TXQ. Vaders Sabers sent this over to me. Thank you guys over at Vaders Sabers. This lightsaber is amazing. Now, I saw you post this. I think I saw a post around September of 2023, if I remember right.
In production for quite a while. There was
Nice.
a lot of things that they were doing that were different from lightsaber production they'd done before. They were working with different materials. This is stainless steel. This is steel. They were doing this is steel with a parkerized finish. So in production, TXQ had to sort of learn for themselves like how to work with some of this material in different ways. And then also they decided, since this was such an investment for them, that they were going to redesign their chassis and do the internal reveal with the crystal. And so that pushed production back a bit.
And that was Taco Shop, right?
I'm not sure. It might be, yeah.
This is awesome. So let's start a little bit with you. How long have you been designing, and what got you into designing lightsabers of all things on Earth?
So I started getting into building I built models as a kid, right? And then I remember my first time actually going to Queens, going to Flushing on like a school trip, and seeing a model shop that did custom, that did garage kits. And I was like, holy shit, like people are building things that aren't just, put out by Ertl and the States and stuff like that. But there are actually like garage kits and customizations, and people are building things from movies that you can't really get like, at Toys R Us.
Right.
And that sparked an interest to do kit bashing and to do custom work on my own.
Nice.
In the probably 99 or 2000, I found the RPF online. Back then, it was transitioning from AOL to an Easy Board, like way early versions.
Way to date all of us.
Yeah, I know. Really early versions of the internet. And found a site called Parts of Star Wars, run by 2 friends of mine, both named Chris. And it listed all the things that they made the lightsabers and the blasters out of in the original Star Wars. And it just like sparked this thing in me and be like, holy shit, I can find lightsabers out in the wild. I can find blaster parts, right? These things like exist, and you can just look, track them down at camera stores. And so I started trying to find that material back when it was still like, relatively inexpensive, right? By just going through bins of old stuff, right? And then I got into like knowing the history of the different parts. At this point, in the community's history, we didn't know what Obi-Wan's lightsaber was actually built out of. The first replica was made by a company called Icons in '96. And largely it was just done from pictures, because at that point, all we knew of the found parts was that this was probably a faucet knob, but we didn't know exactly what version of a faucet knob was.
And we don't know if it's cold or hot either, right?
We don't, now we still don't know if it's cold or hot, but we know exactly what model faucet knob it is. We knew that this was a Graflex clamp at the time, but people thought these were screws. This was supposed to be a motorcycle grip. This was a lawnmower gear, and this was a sink drain. Turned out all those things were wrong.
Yeah.
And then the community in the next 20 years started tracking down, and as the internet grew, right, they started tracking down the found parts, and as the internet grew and the community got bigger, people started saying like, hey, I think I know what that is, right? And over time we found that this was a rifle grenade from a World War I Enfield rifle. This was a part from a jet engine. It was actually like 2 afterburners that fit together inside of what's called a Derwent interconnector. And then this was from a machine gun. And the faucet knob, actually, I was the first one to find the original. I was doing a study abroad in London, and I was at a Mexican restaurant, and I went into the bathroom to like wash my hands, and I looked down, and the nerd that I am, I was like, holy shit, these are the faucet knobs from the 1970s. Yeah.
That's awesome.
And I found one, and I was just like, 1 in a million. They didn't make them anymore. And so I didn't want to like screw these people. I'll tell this story now.
Please tell me you
because
took
I think the statute of limitations has expired at this point.
Yeah.
But I didn't want to like cause problems for the restaurant because I nice people and I like the restaurant. But I was like, and it was an old faucet knob, so I was like, if I rip it off, that would screw them over. But if I replace them, then that won't. And I used to work as a plumber. So I ran down to a hardware store, I bought new faucet knobs, went back in there.
Did you tell them? Or
I just replaced them. I just replaced them. And like, I'm sure they never knew.
Right.
But somebody went there, washed their hands, and were like, someone didn't replace these faucet knobs, did they?
It's fantastic.
Yeah. So that's how I put together my first all real parts Obi-Wan. This is my second, and this is my third one. I had to sell the first one after a divorce. But this is my all real parts Obi-Wan tracked down.
So now,
many
did
years.
you model this directly off of this?
Yes.
So
and
how
no.
did you get to here?
Yes and no. So first of all, I referenced all of the numbers on this part, this part, this part, and this part because they are consistent in production and they don't change. But the frag body on the grenade, when those were made in 1914, there was so much variation from one to another. These are both frag bodies, and they're wildly different in proportions and shape, right? So some things I copied from the original part, and some things I copied from images because there were some weird variations on the one that showed up in the Chronicles photos, and that is the most references. Like the angle here is incredibly sharp. Most of the time it's not. And then the way that these are cut, sometimes they were cut with a saw that had like an angle like this. And so they lean one way or they lean the other way. You can see little variations. So this is based upon, I started with proportions from the found part, and then I modified it based upon the images to match the grenade that they used because each one was different.
Yeah, see that's actually one of the really interesting things to me because you're always thinking movie accuracy, but like the the one that you did is slightly different from this one and is like completely different from this. Like this one doesn't even have an angle on it.
Yep. So in filming of A New Hope, there were probably two different versions of Obi-Wan's lightsaber that he had on his belt.
I even noticed one with and one without the ring too.
Right. This one is called the Chronicles shoot, and it shows up in all the Death Star images, right? When Obi-Wan's walking around, when Anakin is walking around in the Death Star. This one is from the Tunisia shoot. Okay. And it's either there were two different props, which I actually think was the case, or this lightsaber got damaged halfway along through shooting, and they had to take it apart and reassembled it, and they put it backwards so that this has it doesn't have an angle. So there are two different theories, but my theory is that they were two different props because when they went to Tunisia, there were certain things they could take and certain things they couldn't. That's why like the Sand Trooper blasters were cobbled together with some cast parts and some found parts. And also, like, when you're traveling internationally, you don't want to bring one of a key.
Right. And these are basically, they're the same parts, right?
Yep. Same parts.
And it's so weird because they're so different.
Yep.
So it's like you always think of like movie accuracy and you're like, but what really is accurate?
Exactly.
When
TXQ contacted me and they said they wanted to do an Obi-Wan, I told them, I have all the references, I can do the modeling, and I have the original parts that I can work off of. But if you want to do it, let's do it right. Like, let's try to make the best one we possibly can.
Like an idealized.
Yeah, and so in the past, they've been working everything in aluminum. I said, let's do it in steel so that we can get the weathering on the grenade to match what an antique grenade actually looks like, in good condition, but like the types of bluing that were consistent. And then, for this is called a Parkerized finish, which is the same finish that was used on the original machine gun parts.
It's like that matte kind of finish to it.
Yep. This part here, we did it. The original was actually made out of plastic. We did it out of steel because we wanted to keep all of the angles here really sharp.
What original one was?
This part of the rings here, these cubes,
Gotcha.
are actually plastic on the original part because they were made through a injection molding. But if we had done this in plastic, or if we did it in like machine plastic or brass or aluminum, these corners would get all rounded off. So that's why we decided to go with steel.
Okay.
The only sort of changes that I made to make this an FX saber was I put the sound venting on the bottom here, which isn't present on the original. You'll see the original just has a hole.
Right.
But this logo, some people think this is the Anakin Starkiller logo. I use it in a lot of my props, but what it actually is the Armitage Shanks logo that was on some of the faucet knobs. Armitage Shanks was the company that made that, which is like the American standard of Britain, right?
Right.
So that's where that logo is from. And then we did this in stainless steel because the original is this weird material called Inconel, which is impossible to machine. It's really difficult tooling. But stainless is a similar type of composite material.
Right.
And a lot of replicas that, like a lot of high-end replicas, they make them out of steel, but then they end up rusting in ways that this one shouldn't actually rust because it's got so much nickel in it. It shouldn't really turn brown. So that's why I had them to go with stainless.
Yeah, I really love this one. Trying to figure out that, because that actually kind of looks like images that I've seen. You know, some of the images I've seen of Obi-Wan when he holds it like that kind of looks.
Yeah.
So
years ago, we thought that a piece of the grenade might have been sticking out. But then through different image analysis, we determined on the RPF that was not the case. Some people think that there was a part of the machine gun was turned down and stuck into the emitter, but we really don't know. So I just tried to sort of match the angles and the way it looks when the camera hits it as much as possible.
That's fantastic. The wires, I've noticed that, I actually pointed this out on the review here. The screw, the wire, the screw, and then the wire. So what was the deal with the wire?
So some people think that they were called, they used cotter pins.
Just to kind of hold everything together?
To hold everything together,
okay.
Yeah. On the Tunisia version, there are no holes and there are no cotter pins on the clamp.
Right.
On the Chronicles version, there are screws and holes. So some people think they basically put a cotter pin and then bent it around and tied it
kind
together.
Of clamped it all together.
Yeah.
So I noticed that on the little master replica that I showed on the thing, it actually included the wires, which I thought was super cool.
Yeah,
nice little detail.
When Steve designed those, a friend of mine, Steve, was the founder of Master Replicas. When he designed those, he was the first one to introduce those into his replica. I put the holes in there on the TXQ version so that if people want to add cotter pins, they don't have to do any drilling. It's basically just...
Yeah, so I was saying that on the review. I was like, the holes are there, so if you wanted to take it upon yourself, you probably could just easily pop those wires in, which is a great little detail to have. So another thing I wanted to ask, because a couple of people asked me, and I actually brought it up in the video, let's see, what do yours look like? Is that what it's supposed to look like?
This is what it looks like on the hot and cold taps. That's what it looks like.
Okay, so that is actually what it looks like.
This is original, but this is a slightly different version. These were used on hot and cold taps.
Yeah.
This was used on a shower where you would turn it to the left or to the right to adjust for hot and cold. So the inside's slightly different. And the angle here is slightly different. You can see it's more of a sharp angle.
Okay, so it doesn't actually have a smooth cap. Here's the thing with most people would think of it as a sink. It kind of has that, faucet top.
Right.
So that's actually not what it looks like?
So the faucet top cap, it might have been present in filming, it might not. We know on the Tunisia saber, it was not there because there were photos that actually showed up in Alec Guinness's obituary that showed it on his belt and you could zoom in and you could see that the cap was missing.
Okay.
But we can't tell because there were different types of internal setups for that, depending upon what types of taps they were screwing onto.
Okay.
So sometimes there was a square post that they would fit onto. Sometimes there was a star. Sometimes there was a thing with a whole bunch of little aerations around it. On the Chronicles version, we don't know if the cap was present or not. You can put a cap on there. Like if you go to Home Depot and you get yourself a hole plug, you can put it on there and it'll look just the same as what you're saying there.
That's awesome, because that was actually one little detail. I was like, I wish they gave just a display cap.
Yeah.
But now knowing what these actual parts look like, see, that one kind of has.
That has.
That has the cold. This one actually has a cold cap on it, and then this one here looks just like the TXQ one here.
Yep.
So
since the only photos we have of the bottom of the saber are from the Tunisia version, that's why I decided to leave the cap off and copy it that way.
So man, this thing is like an exact freaking replica. It's fantastic. It's great work on it.
Thanks.
Now another thing is the placement of the wind vane.
So
every time I think of it much higher. But then I see so many other versions where it's basically centered.
So the way that this part worked on the original grenade, right? There would be a rod here that would go into the rifle.
Yeah.
And then when you would fire it, the wind vane would spin. It would actually catch the wind, and it would hit the little cotter, the little pin there. And when it hit that pin, it would arm the grenade, and then it would explode. So it's meant to move,
To spin
up
up and down.
Right. And all of the found grenades that I've owned or examined throughout the years, there's a lot of different placement of where the wind vane sits. In the Tunisia shoot, it's far down, and there's a lot of neck here exposed.
Gotcha.
In the Chronicles version, so in like the Death Star scenes, it's higher
Much
up.
higher.
Now, I designed this to match an original found part, and so it's meant to sort of screw down a little bit farther. But if you want to go for a Chronicles look, you'll have to unscrew it, and it'll sit a little bit higher. What I'm going to do...
Yeah, so you can, yeah.
Yeah, because like the reason why it sits so high on this and on some of the other grenades is just because it's like there's so much oxidation that like at a certain point the brass parts just seize up together and it sits like right on the screw. It doesn't screw down anymore.
Right.
Whereas like since this is a new production, it does screw down and that's where it ends up falling.
Right.
I'm gonna do a small. I have 15 of these that I'm going to sell through my website.
Okay, so you modified yours slightly, right?
Yeah. So what I did, the clamp on this, I've changed the plating so it matches a Graflex clamp more readily. It has a more satin finish to it. And then I have these 3 printed parts that are going to sit in there that allow this to thread in the Chronicles position. And then I'm probably going to replace the D-rings on these because I have other ones I like a little bit better.
And this is much more brushed
Yeah.
than chrome.
Yeah. It's same process, it's just this has an extra layer of finishing to get the brush finished. And then I think Haloax actually printed out some decals that I'm going to put on here to match the original transistors. Yeah.
So it's just a couple little tweaks.
The director's cut.
There you go. That's awesome. And you get that on your website too, right? That's awesome. Now you actually have 2 other versions of the episode 1 that you brought with you.
Yeah. So there's this weird version of Obi-Wan's lightsaber that was made by the Lucasfilm prop department when they were preparing for Revenge of the Sith. Originally, there was going to be a subplot where Obi-Wan has his episode 1, episode 2 lightsaber, and then loses it halfway through the film, and either builds his own or takes one of Grievous's. And that ended up being cut, and so they just said, keep it consistent with the episode 4 version of the lightsaber throughout. But the prop was made, and there are behind-the-scenes photos that show it on Ewan's belt. There's a couple shots of Padme's apartment where he has it on his belt, and we know he practiced with it. So it was pretty late into production that they decided to change it. So this version is often tours with the Lucasfilm exhibits to show off Obi-Wan's lightsaber, and it's often called the salt shaker version because it has the weird thing of it has 3 holes in the emitter. And it has a copper button instead of a red button. The LED bezels are slightly different than the episode 1 version, and the pommel cap's a little different. So what I'm going to be releasing in a very limited number on my website is this as a kit that you can either build into one of these 2 options. It'll have 4 different versions of the emitter. One that's the episode 1, episode 2 version, one that's that Revenge of the Sith version, and then I have FX versions with holes in both of those. And then there'll be 2 different versions of the button. One of them is going to be copper, one of them is going to be the red button, which is from an aircraft blanking cap that friends of mine tracked down. 2 different versions of the LEDs that you can install if you want to do the episode 1, episode 2, or the episode 3 version.
So it'll just be an interchangeable body, basically, with parts.
And then different versions of the pommel. I have a vented pommel cap, and then I have, this is the episode 3 pommel cap, and this is the episode 1, episode 2 pommel cap.
So the one thing that I'm always told is that these things are supposed to be uneven on the prop itself.
In my collection, I have an episode 1 stunt saber. And what you can see is that on the episode 1 saber, the hero that Ewan wore on his belt for most of the filming,
right?
When he wasn't using a resin stunt, because a lot of times he just uses resin stunts,
right.
That this part was machined from plastic, this part is machined from plastic, and they were all done by hand. So a lot of cutouts vary wildly.
Right.
So if you take a micrometer to it, you'll see that these are different.
All slightly
spaces.
different.
Yeah. This version is from the episode 2 and episode 3 hero. So by then they were doing things on CNC because like by the time you get to like the Dooku lightsaber and the Mace Windu lightsaber, you can't really machine those by hand. They have to be done on a CNC setup. So they were making all these on CNC by the time you got to those, and so the spacing ends up evening out on the later productions.
Yeah, that was something with Luke's remakes of his, like the rings were different sizes and everything like that, right?
Yeah, the Luke, I mean, Luke's lightsaber from Return of the Jedi actually starts out as a leftover stunt saber of Obi-Wan's. So this is what's called the V2, which I actually did design this one also for TXQ. It's a clean version, but normally when you see these, they're heavily weathered. Because,
and what this is the stunt version of what this was, right?
So the crazy thing, what they did to get to here is they took this and then they put it in this old woodworking machine that was meant to copy lathe profiles. Like before you had CNC, you would turn something on a lathe, and then if you wanted to make more, there was this machine that would like duplicate it by tracing the outline
like a key.
of it.
Like when they do produce keys.
Just like a key, right? So they stuck this thing in the machine, it traced the outline, and then they made a copy out of wood. Then they took that copy and they cast them in metal, and then they like hacked them up to do electronics in there because they had a rotating blade in the episode 4 lightsabers. So that's how they made the stunt sabers that would have like, that would make the blade spin and send a reflective flash back to the camera when you filmed it. When they came to filming Return of the Jedi, they realized they needed to make a new lightsaber since Luke had lost his in Empire Strikes Back. And so they grabbed one of the old Obi-Wan stunt sabers and just chopped the blade off of it and hung it on Mark's belt.
Put a little tape over there and everything.
Yep. And so this one is generally pretty beat up because it's been, you know, a workhorse for at least 6 years at that point.
And you did this off of like original parts and everything too, kind of like this one?
This one, so a friend of mine had worked in the film industry in the 1990s. And he knew a guy that worked on Star Wars. And when the guy found out he was a Star Wars fan, he said, "Yeah, you know what you'd like? I have one of these leftover production stunts
just
from
a
episode
leftover.
4." Yeah,
just leftover stuff.
He comes into work one day and he's like, "Here, you want one of these? I worked on Star Wars and I took one of these at the end of it." And so what it was a casting that was the same castings that they made the V2 out of it. Right? So this weird relic that had been left over.
Crazy.
So my friend Tom, who owned the original one, was generous enough to send me measurements. And I sent him a blueprint with a bunch of numbers.
Okay.
And I said, "Can you just take calipers to it and fill in all the numbers for me?" And he did. And I was able to, and so I used that to create the 3D model. And then I modeled in some of the like idiosyncrasies that I could see in the V2 and created so if you've ever seen some of my replicas, not the ones that TXQ produces, but the one that I make on my own website, you'll see things like all the grip ridges are different.
Slightly different.
Yeah, there's like sometimes the recesses here are cut differently because of the way that they were produced. When it came time to make this for TXQ, I idealized things like the grip ridges or the recesses here because TXQ usually produces things that are more like what you imagine it to look like.
Sure.
Right? And so like in real life, this thing is beat to hell and looks like shit. Right. Just
like we think of the Luke saber as the hero version, but really what you see pretty much throughout the movie is this or the V3 and stuff like that.
Exactly. But proportionally, you know, if you put the original right next to it, so much of this will line up. This will be a little bit different. This will be a little bit different just in the recesses. But it will size-wise match almost dead on.
That's awesome, man. All right, so it was awesome to see all of these lightsabers, especially these real-world parts, man. It's incredible just to see how beat to hell some of these things are.
This one was pulled from the ground in France in like...
Really?
Yeah.
For real?
That's why it's so roughed up because I bought it on an auction site.
Beat to hell.
Yeah.
Wow. It's incredible to really see. I mean, because I'll never see these parts in like something like this. I mean, these are awesome. You know, no matter how much you recreate something like that, to see the actual real pieces in person of what this really would have looked like on Alec Guinness's belt, you know, it's amazing. It really is amazing, man. I appreciate it. thank you so much for coming by.
Anyways, thanks for having me.
If you want to follow him, I will put all of his links down below at Star's End, and check everything out because his work is phenomenal. All right, I will see you all on the next video. Thank you so much, and see ya.